Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And today, we are very fortunate to once again have as our special guest, Patrick Henningsen. He needs no introduction to Gagglers. He's been on before. He's a well-known journalist, blogger, broadcaster, and does excellent work on international affairs.
An all-around good guy.
An all-around good guy, of course.
Thank you.
So, Patrick, I mean, obviously, the topic under discussion is the Middle East, and I want to start off with a I think a rather important topic. It's maybe a very awkward topic, nonetheless. It's something that we should discuss, and in particular, in light of the story that emerged in the last 24 hours or so about this alleged massacre of babies. 40 babies had their heads cut off. And then it turned out to be a fake. Now, what that leads us to think is, well, how much of what we've been told since last Saturday, no question that this was a horrifying attack, but how much of it is true? How much do we know is true? You know, how much has been exaggerated? Because after all, if you have a horrifying attack, why do you need to exaggerate it? You know, the facts should speak for themselves. So, first question, really, Patrick, what's your take? How much do we really know about what happened during that Saturday attack?
Yeah, so this is a really emotive topic, as you can imagine, because as a result of the reporting on a couple of these specific incidents, and these are the ones that have really penetrated the Western psyche. So you can imagine, firstly, we'll start with the 40 dead babies report, which was all over the British tabloids yesterday, by the way, pretty much on the front of every paper. And when I first saw this story, I just thought to myself, the reason I was skeptical about this, so at the moment, there's been official denials by the Israeli Defense Force. They say they don't know anything about it. The journalist who put out the initial report has already walked it back. Okay, from I-24. This is the media outlet. Now, we did some research on this outlet. It's directly connected to the president's, the prime minister's office, Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's controversial in that the person that owns it, there's been a number of exposés done about this organization. So it's regarded as a state propaganda outlet. But the journalist put it out, and then almost in complete coordination, all the so-called conservative influencers in America all tweeted this out at the same time yesterday. And so it got hundreds of millions of impressions and views on X Twitter platform and other platforms. And so then it began to be debunked in the afternoon at U.S. time, about right before noon. But then the president goes to speak. Joe Biden then uses this story in his speech. So it's, so the most people believe it happened. And so how did this come to pass?
Mission accomplished. Mission
accomplished. Babies in incubators in Iraq, Assad's gassing the babies in Syria. And the reason I was skeptical, because I've been engaged in this Palestine-Israel issue for about 25 years. So I've been following it fairly closely for a while. And even during that time, I've researched the history all the way back to the foundation of the state of Israel, the occupation, the Nakba, everything. And I've never seen this type of behavior by any Palestinian factions or militants. It's just haven't seen it. So you'd have to believe that all of a sudden there was this kind of freak event that's totally uncharacteristic of everything you've seen in the past. So that was the first thing that came as a red flag, just as critical thinking and being skeptical. Then the second thing was how coordinated the release of the story is. And the third thing was, where was the evidence? Because certainly if you had any evidence of this or any photos, it would be front and center across the global media, and it would probably justify a scorched earth policy by the Israelis against the native population of the Palestinians in Gaza. So all these things together made me skeptical, and many others. And of course, sooner or later, it happened. And there's been official denials by the Israeli defense, and the government's kind of backing off it. But the U.S. and Western media are running with it. And I've been attacked by very high-profile people on social media in the last 24 hours saying that I'm an apologist for terrorist atrocities. So it's like, so George and Peter, about atrocity propaganda in history.
Of course.
And the flip side of that is the charge of atrocity denial. So now what you have is, when there's an emotive event, whether it's a alleged chemical weapons attack in Syria, or whether it's the Bucha massacre in Ukraine, or whether it's this 40 beheaded babies a few hours after. First it was 40 dead settlers, then 40 dead babies, then 40 dead beheaded babies. And then you're immediately put on the spot by people. Do you disavow this event? Will you condemn this brutal terrorist attack by Hamas? Where's your humanity? And you're constantly getting ribbed by this. Luckily, this has happened. I've been in this position before, so I'm used to the process. But people who have just been kind of red-pilled in recent years, they're not so used to it. And a lot of people kind of folded very early, just frightened by the juggernaut of public opinion, and swimming against the current on this. You got to be a strong, steelhead salmon to swim against this current. And I don't blame people for not wanting to, but go ahead.
Just following up on that, what about the rest of it? For instance, the stories about the rapes, that there was mass rapes that took place during this attack. What evidence do we have for that?
We have, unfortunately, there's no evidence of this. And one of the high-profile cases of this is one of these festival goers at this unlikely trance rave festival that was held right on the security fence of the Gaza Strip, the most militarized place in the world. Bizarre, but that's a separate inquiry. But one of the supposed victims of this, there was video going around about a girl who was, they said Hamas stripped her naked or almost naked and killed her, and then there's allegations of rape and whatever. And because of the photos and the images that circulated, it looked like that might be the case. So it turns out her mother puts out a video last night saying, "My daughter is fine. She's alive. She's actually being cared for in a hospital in Gaza." Believe it or not. Yes. So that one,
it was also. I very rarely watch Al Jazeera, but I tend to think they have more extensive coverage, at least, of something like this. And I saw this interview was on yesterday, and they interviewed this woman. She looked like she was in front of like a grocery store. Yes, my mother was abducted. We don't know where she is. And she was smiling and like holding grocery bags. Like, this is so weird. I mean, I'd be mortified if I thought that my mother was in the captivity of terrorists, but it was just so casually said. And it really struck me as being very, very bizarre.
There's a lot of bizarre coverage, Peter. And the other thing is that there were initial reports about this festival. There was 260 people massacred by Hamas. We're still waiting to see where the evidence is on this. The initial report, funny enough, came from an Israeli rescue organization called Zaka. And so this will be like a type of a white helmet's equivalent in Israel. So very connected with, funded by the Israeli government, ostensibly, I would imagine. They made the initial report. It turns out this scene at this festival, CNN even said that there was a police or military vehicle driving against the flow of people fleeing the scene, and gunshot fires fired in multiple directions. So you can imagine what a chaotic scene that might be. There's also the potential for friendly fire. But besides all this, where is the evidence? We need to see the evidence. Just a claim isn't enough to build or to justify a massive retaliatory strike and get the whole of the world's population to endorse that and say no ceasefire, no quarter. They need to pay. Hamas needs to be exterminated, as Nikki Haley said.
And the military side of it has also been diminished, because after all, Hamas did attack military sites. They attacked military bases, they attacked intelligence bases, they attacked barracks. All that has been put on the back burner. Instead, the focus has been all on this festival, and then the attacks on the kibbutzim.
And also, again, my source is Al Jazeera. They had a reporter that on the very close to the line, the border line separating Israel proper from Gaza, and so the Israeli authorities saying that the border has been sealed, all breaches have been sealed, And this poor reporter, he said, well, it looks like they're still hunting down these people that made their incursion here. I mean, he was kind of, I got the impression he said what was in his head is like, what am I supposed to say? Because the police are telling me they're going after people. The sporadic gunfire going around. Who are they firing at themselves? Of course not. So the even Al Jazeera, which I think they do try to be even-handed, was kind of left like, we don't know. This is what they say, and this is what our reporter sees.
So you're operating in a heavily propagandized environment. And I'll just tell you, just looking at the statements from the IDF, from the defense minister, saying that they're suspending all rules of engagement. There will be no military trials. Therefore, the gloves are off. Whatever the soldiers do, whatever the government can do, it's all fair game. And so this is total. So if this is total warfare, then the media space, the information space, all is justified, including propaganda. So make no qualms about it. Forget about ethics and morals. It doesn't apply. And they're not shy about that, I would imagine, when you're dealing with the situation like this. And so that includes propaganda from mainstream media outlets. And then, so Al Jazeera, of course, their reporting on Syria was absolutely horrible.
Yes.
But then again, Qatar was involved in backing the so-called moderate rebels. But Al Jazeera on Palestine does excellent reporting.
I've said this to George many times.
Yeah.
Iran is an enemy. Russia is an enemy. They play both sides with Western politics, but on the Palestine issue, it seems like they have their own path, their own lane, and that's why I watch it.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's usually excellent. So if they don't know what's going on, then in Israel and on that's reporting, then that it's a very difficult environment to work in. And so the Israelis will control the information very tightly on this. And so for them, it's a national security existential issue. So what you're going to get through those sources.
The key here is that this focus on atrocities, the butchery of civilians, this has all been picked up by the Western politicians, and particularly Biden's ridiculous address yesterday. And then it's repeated by the British politicians and so on. This is then serves as justification that Israel can do what it wants. When say we have Israel's back. I mean, how many times did Biden say yesterday? We fully support Israel. We have Israel. In other words, Israel is free to do whatever it wants, whatever it wants, and we will support you.
A war of annihilation. We've heard this phrase before, and we have seen how that phrase was played out during the Second World War on the Eastern Front.
Right. So babies on bayonets, Belgian babies on bayonets, World War I. So look, how this has been framed from the beginning, you can kind of see how this was framed early. It's Israel versus Hamas. You see this on the chyrons in the United States media. So ostensibly it's the state of Israel versus terrorists, because they've stripped Hamas of any political agency or their sort of governing status in Gaza, just like kind of Hezbollah has been. They've ignored the fact that Hezbollah holds almost a majority in the Lebanese parliament. This is not like a ragtag militia. Okay, it's a serious organization. Politically, they do have a paramilitary wing, which serves as the de facto defense force for southern Lebanon. Yes, they do have expeditionary roles in places like Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government, and in Iraq, in the same, working with the Hashd al-Shabi, which is under the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. Likewise, Hamas has to, because they don't have a defense force in Gaza. There's 2.5 million people there. They've had to take up the role of protecting the population, the native Palestinian population. So this has been deemed as terrorism by the West, by Israel. So it's Israel versus the terrorists and not Israel versus the Palestinians. So the problem here is, the contradiction here, the hypocrisy here, is that if Israel declares formal war, which Benjamin Netanyahu did, against a non-state actor, Hamas. That's not even possible in any international relations framework at all. So that doesn't make sense. And what's worse is then they're enacting collective punishment on the entire population of Gaza. So none of this comports with normal politics or how we define relations in international law or the UN Charter or UN resolutions. In fact, the UN passed a resolution which said that the Palestinian resistance had the right to take up an armed defense of the population. That is their right under international law. Just like the people of Lugansk and Donetsk had a right to take up to defend themselves
You
against.
notice, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But you notice how Biden said, yeah, we have Israel. Israel can do what he wants. And then he slipped in a little phrase. But of course, we always follow rules of engagement. We're always following rules. I mean, in other words, he had to have some legal advice that told him, well, you got to put in a little sentence here because you're essentially calling for, war of annihilation, complete violations of the international law. So he had to slip something in. Oh, but of course, we follow rules. That's the difference between us and them.
Fallujah writ large.
Yeah, they follow rules of engagement. Yeah, again, this is the U.S., the West, trying to rediscover international law. So what you have is now, schools are fair game in Gaza. International schools, a UN school was bombed. Hospitals are fair game. Mosques are fair game. Mosques have been destroyed, leveled. We've seen the images and the footages in the last 24 hours. And the justification for this is people speaking on behalf of the IDF will say that if we suspect that there's weapons in the mosques or any militants, then it's a legitimate target. Ditto with hospitals, ditto with schools. But when you cut off the electricity, you cut off the food, you cut off the diesel fuel for backup generators, then the hospital, if they have patients in intensive care, ICU, cancer patients, whatever, it's likely they may die if the hospital doesn't have sufficient power and supplies. So then this is another level of the siege that is, secondary deaths as a result of the siege itself.
Well, another anomaly, I'm glad you brought this up, a non-state actor, because this doesn't fall smoothly under international law. Let's just say hypothetically, Hamas wants to surrender. They won't accept that. Okay, they won't. Okay, because because there are no terms on terms and conditions of engagement. We don't recognize this as a legitimate government, and so they were going to be able to have a free for all, and no matter what the Hamas and the other militias have to say. And this is going to be a massive casualty event, massive.
Yep. If you look at the last ones, you guys, Operation Cast Lead, Protective Edge, okay, with the fighting going on for weeks, and finally they relent. So even one of them, it was 4 Israeli soldiers died, and it wasn't even directly Hamas, but the response was that 1,000 plus 1,200 Palestinians and mostly civilians and many children and women died as a result. What are you going to see here if the reports are 1,000 Israelis have died or been killed in the fighting and so forth? What are we talking about? 10,000 Palestinian lives? Is that going to be the sufficient payment in blood for the Israelis? 15,000, 20,000. And what I'm looking at, you guys, is I'm looking at Raqqa, and I'm looking at Mosul, and I'm looking at the death toll, civilian death tolls. Let's just say Raqqa, conservatively, according to multiple international organizations, averaging out the casualties, 10 to 12,000 conservatively dead in the leveling of Raqqa, with U.S. sorties just pummeling that city. And the West turned a blind eye to this. And the reason the West turned a blind eye to this is because, they were harboring ISIS. So it's unfortunate, but they're collateral damage. And a wink and a nod. They're Arabs anyway. I'm sorry to sound crass, but I know how Americans.
That's absolutely true.
So they're Arabs anyway, but they should have risen up and thrown out ISIS. It's really their own fault. We're sorry. And actually, we actually don't agree with those figures from human rights
have been
watch.
worse. It could have been worse.
It could have been much worse. We were very judicious with our targeting, and we do our utmost to avoid civilian human casualties. You've heard all the lines, you guys. So what's going to happen here is the same justification afterwards is going to be used as with Raqqa and Mosul. So the people just basically, you can erase them out. And so as of 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time yesterday, there were 450 air sorties flown in Gaza. Okay, and they have pummeled whole neighborhoods, have razed buildings to the ground with multiple if you understand how people in this city, because it's the most densely populated place in the world, the last place you want to be doing scorched earth airstrikes with F-16s. But because of that, families will build their houses where they'll have multiple generations, and each as the grandkids are born, they build another floor. As the next, they'll build another floor. 5-6-story buildings with one family inside. So what Palestinians have to do is to split the family up. I spoke to one aid worker there. She's saying that they split the family up they send the kids to the uncles and the aunts, and the other kids over and then the parents there, because they don't want to be in one place during airstrikes, because they don't want to lose the entire family. So they want to preserve the bloodline, knowing that. And I personally have friends, good family friends, who have lost up to 12 members of their family in the last 48 hours. And I don't know very many people in Gaza. I know people that know a lot of people there. So I'm just one anecdotal story from me. It's absolutely horrific. So so imagine having to do that, to split the family up, so the family can endure to the next generation. You don't see any of this in the Western media.
No, and that's what's interesting, is that what Israel has been doing now for the past 48 hours is pushed to the side, and the focus is still on what happened on Saturday. I mean, you pick up the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian. They're still talking about the festival. They're still talking about, what they did at the festival, and but everything that's been going on in Gaza, they pay hardly any attention to that.
And the Westerners have just gone off a summer of probably attending festivals in the US and Europe. So that talking point penetrates very deeply, so they can relate to that. And what happens when you're emotionally invested in a narrative, even after it's been debunked, you don't want to let go of it, because you've just you invested so much in it. You will more likely attack the person that's exposing it or shattering that. Look at right now with Ukraine. What do they talk about more than anything to point to Russian aggression? It's Bucha. Yeah. It's Bucha and it's Mariupol. They show the council estates, the same 5 buildings in Mariupol, and say, look at what those Russians did. Their scorched earth policy. Forget the fact that all those buildings have been rebuilt to a standard that would never have existed had the Russians not done the reconstruction. But put that aside, look at what they're doing in Gaza. Literally turning it to rubble. And one aid worker that we spoke to also said, who's not there now but does do aid work there, said that will take months to sift through the rubble to see who's in the rubble or what's in the rubble. It will take months to rebuild that. They don't have the materials readily at hand to rebuild that. That could take anything from 5 to 10 years. So, I mean, and they haven't finished yet. And as Peter said, the worst is possibly yet to come.
I don't know whether you saw the, sorry, I just finished this up. The news conference of the State Department, and Max Blumenthal asked the question to, I think, Miller or whatever his name is, about these babies and children that are being killed in Gaza. What do you say about that? Are you going to condemn Israel for doing that? And Miller, he kind of ducked the question. Well, I'm very surprised people are raising this issue when it's Israel that has been under attack. It's Israel that's been subjected to savagery. So why are you talking about this? But basically, he doesn't have anything to say about the killing of children in Gaza.
Well, I had Ramzi Baroud on my program yesterday, and he's a good friend. He's a wonderful man. And I warned him before the program, said, I'm going to provoke you. Okay, so get prepared. And so I started out with my question. I said, so we're all told that this is an unprovoked attack. How do you respond to that? And of course, I got him. Okay, because he did exactly what I wanted, measured, but with emotion. And I counted into kind of intersected the unprovoked Russian attack on Ukraine. And I said, these are parallel narratives here. And I think that when you use this unprovoked thing, I'm like you guys, and maybe I should look at a little bit more Western media, because I cannot conscience the bloodthirst out there. It is just, what happened to our civilization? My goodness, what happened?
Yeah.
I mean, just really, wipe them out, take them out. It's just, this is where we are. This is how far we have come. It really is terrifying.
Right, and these are the people, the same people who have been banging their chests and pulling out their hair about the terrible things that Russia is doing in Ukraine. We can't take it. It's so awful. But here, hey, finish them. Get the job done. Go in there and get it done. Kill however many you need.
Well, George, all through social media here is that what they've done is they've done these back-to-back short videos playing. One is Kiev at the beginning of the conflict, Kiev 1 year into the conflict, Kiev 20 months into the conflict, and it showed one district of Gaza was just pummeled, but think it's gone. And that was in a day and a half.
Incomprehensible to most people, but the Palestinians are used to that. This is normal life for them. Unfortunately, this is what they have to endure. So, Peter, you don't like to watch the Western mainstream media, especially the U.S. media. So I do that for you, Peter. So
Thank you. And George reads the New York Times for me. Thank you.
So you don't have to suffer. I will tell you what I saw yesterday. I sat through probably the most difficult and nauseating media experience of my life. I'm not exaggerating. I watched Sean Hannity yesterday.
I couldn't take that. Can't take it.
I'm
that.
sorry.
You got a stronger stomach and a stronger conscience than I do.
And who was on?
That did cross my mind. No, I saw Megyn Kelly, her little thumbnail, and it was all about Israel. I skipped it.
Who was on Sean Hannity? Lindsey Graham and Mark Levin.
You guys have no idea. You have no idea. I will break the bad news to you. So, of course, you expect Alan Dershowitz and, the usual suspects on All Bang for Blood, Tom Cotton, All Bang for Blood. We need to smash the Hamas, smash the Palestinians, teach them a lesson. Hannity is saying they need to leave their homes in Gaza or they're going to die. He repeated this about 10 times. So that's calling for ethnic cleansing on the top cable news network. Where are they supposed to go, by the way? They're hemmed in, and Israel was bombing the Rafah crossing to keep people from leaving. Okay, so that's what's actually happening there. So Hannity is basically calling for ethnic cleansing and genocide openly and unabashedly. And basically they're saying that they're having a go at Biden for being weak and giving $6 billion to Iran, and that helped to fund this atrocity, etc. Even though that's not true, but I hate to. That
money is still in escrow someplace. Okay.
Yeah, I hate to side with Joe Biden, even tangentially, but the fact that Joe Biden's asleep while this was happening might actually be a great thing for humanity, that he wasn't even there to do anything brash. But so Hannity, the bloodlust, Peter, is really terrible. I think this is a real low point in morality in
just
America.
A question: did Dershowitz call for ethnic cleansing? Because after all, he knows the law. He knows the implications of calling for ethnic cleansing.
He said so many things. I'll just pick out two things that he said. So he said, we need to, this isn't going to stop until we destroy Iran's nuclear reactors. Okay, so calling for basically World War III. You know what that means if they go and destroy, and especially if there's a radiological incident as a result. So he's calling for that. Now, the students at Harvard drafted a letter. You probably saw this in the news, in support of Palestine. So last night, Dershowitz was on Hannity saying, we need to dox these students. We need to get their names. We need to send them to all the top law firms to make sure that they don't get employment on graduation.
He said that?
Yes, on Hannity.
Well, that's what he did to Norman Finkelstein.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So I'm not even paraphrasing there. I'm telling you that's almost an exact quote. You can go watch it for yourself if you're able to. So the vitriol, the bloodlust, it was just on another level. Now, the most disappointing one, of course, was watching Tulsi Gabbard. And I couldn't imagine she'd ever be captured by this lobby, but she has. So she got on there basically voicing her commitment to fight terrorism, and we need to stand with Israel. And she was banging on about the Sunnis and the Shiites and all of the tropes that you would see on Fox. And the last thing you'd expect from somebody who is supposedly the leader of the anti-war movement in America, basically taking the neocon line and sounding more neocon than the neocons in actuality. So like, I don't really know what to say other than a huge disappointment. My heart sunk.
But one thing, I don't know whether, Patrick, you noticed, I don't know, Peter, you noticed now, one person who has been outside of the mainstream has been Steve Bannon. Now, Bannon is kind of sounding like Pat Buchanan circa 1990, Pat Buchanan circa 2002. He's saying this is not our war. You know, we support Israel, but it's basically not our war. We have no business getting sucked into yet another crazy Middle East war. And though the guests who come on Bannon don't really agree with him, I mean, it's his show. But nonetheless, that's a very distinctive voice that, you know, basically, this is not our war. And in any case, it's kind of Israel brought it on itself because of its incompetence, that it's bad military and so on and so forth. So I don't know, what do you make of that, Patrick?
Steve Bannon's untethered from the establishment well and truly now, because he's been targeted in all the court cases and everything. He's a pariah in the U.S. political system, and often the pariahs are the ones who can actually speak freely without any restraint. I'll just read you what Tulsi Gabbard, her official statement is: the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by Islamist terrorist group Hamas. So she disavows any political characteristics of Hamas. So then she goes on to say, this is just the latest example of a greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shiite Islamist jihadists throughout the world. So she's saying that this is a terrorist, radical terrorist event, has nothing to do with the illegal occupation of Palestine, which is recognized by multiple UN resolutions. So this is Tulsi Gabbard, who was quoting international law in defense of Syria. And so now she must basically back Syria's Israel's airstrikes against targets in Syria, which Israel claim are against Iran. So she's now fully on that side. So she goes on.
She doesn't want to lose her gig at Fox News. That's what this means. Okay.
Or she's planning a mainstream return to politics, and she's been told this is a necessary thing to do. But nonetheless, she continues. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamist jihadists are the greatest short-term and long-term threat to safety, security, and the freedom of the American people and the people throughout the world. And so this is dovetailed with all the calls now from all the conservative media and Fox saying that Hamas is coming over the southern border. There's lots of reports appearing now. Now, I've covered Operation Fast and Furious along the border in 2012. I also covered the migrant siege under Obama, which I think was summer of 2014. Okay, so I saw all those reports that they fabricated that Hezbollah was coming over the southern border. I mean, you had Duncan Hunter, congressman from California, you had Judicial Watch was pushing this, and then that was repurposed, Peter, to ISIS coming over the southern border, which they refabricated after the appearance of ISIS in the summer of 2014. So this is like a Christmas fruitcake that gets passed around from refrigerator to refrigerator every year. And they've just repurposed this now for Hamas, and then add Hezbollah in for a little bit of extra flavor. So how on earth, if Hamas is hemmed in the Gaza Strip, and they're quite busy at the moment, you could say, do they have time to be eating tacos in Mexico? I really don't think so. But this is the suspension of disbelief that Americans, especially look, we criticize the left a lot, Peter, and I know you do on your show, and they have their own sort of proclivities when it comes to fear mongering about domestic extremists. Okay, but the right, anything when you introduce Muslims or Arabs, they just spin off onto a whole dervish of their own. And this is what's happened here. So this is post 9/11 recycling of narratives to justify a reorientation of U.S. foreign policy. And the danger here is that Israel might find it advantageous to draw America into a direct confrontation with Iran, rather than do it by
But- but
themselves.
I think-
I found it very, very curious. I'm sure both of you did that. They sending the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier group. They might send a second aircraft carrier. So what is Hamas going to do? Shoot bow and arrows? I mean, throw rocks at them? I mean, what in the world? I mean, it's so disproportionate. I mean, what is the mission then? Okay. I mean, again, this fear mongering, and yeah, we have to fight him over there, but so we don't have to fight him over here. Another just reincarnation of that.
Right,
And
but I think that's
go
that's
ahead,
where I think
George.
it gets
Yeah.
interesting, because if Netanyahu then launches a full-scale invasion of Gaza, then it is quite likely that Hezbollah
I
will
think
get
so.
involved.
I
And
think
once
so.
Hezbollah is involved, then we do have a kind of a full-scale war, because then there'll be the other kind of militia that will get involved. Then Israel will be under all-out attack,
George,
and that's the
George-
point at which the United States might well get sucked into this war.
I
Yes.
just earlier today I watched a podcast with Norman Finkelstein, and he says that he has sources that Hezbollah has up to 100,000 missiles now in
Yeah.
its arsenal.
Yeah, and look, you've seen what Hezbollah did in Syria. They played the leading role in urban warfare in pushing out the Western-backed al-Nusra factions and all the other jihadist groups, and in the fight against ISIS, and working alongside the Iranian Quds forces led by Qasem Soleimani. They have 10 years of high level against the top militants in the world. ISIS, al-Nusra, these are Western trained, Western armed. These are better soldiers than anybody even in the Syrian Arab army. And that's according to the Syrian army, that these fighters were that good. And so Hezbollah defeated them on the ground. Now, Hezbollah also took heavy losses. They probably lost, who knows, anything between 5,000 plus men during that, maybe more. So how many losses has the IDF incurred since they were defeated by Hezbollah in 2006, when Israel was kicked out of South Lebanon? They haven't really incurred any losses. Are they willing? How many losses are they willing to incur? Because Hezbollah is not a ragtag organization. They're very strategic. They have a great command structure. They're well equipped. They're well trained. They don't get into situations that they can't come out with a win. So they're very careful in how they engage their opponent. So this isn't like your normal. This isn't Hezbollah even of 2006. This is like 5x Hezbollah from 2006. So that's a significant adversary for the IDF. I don't give the Israelis a very good chance against Hezbollah if they're going to face off against them. And what happens then if Syria weighs in at that point over the Golan Heights?
Right.
And what's it?
And of course there is Iran. I mean, because Israel may
Iran.
well try to, if Israel tries to draw Iran into the war, that gets the United States involved, and that's really the real danger here, because that may well be Israel's plan, because as you say, Israel may not prevail. I mean, this is not 1967. It's not 1973. No. Israel just doesn't have that kind of overwhelming strength relative to its.
But George, this scenario, this is the ultimate doomsday scenario. No one wins.
No. Yeah. So, and they're calling it Israel's 9/11, which is completely disingenuous. But the reason they're doing that is because they want to draw a line under this event to change U.S. foreign policy, to change the way people look at the Middle East, maybe to bring it back. Maybe it's a bit of a revisionist move to try to bring the United States back into the region in a bigger way. But, even that's not really a path forward, because the Middle East is different. It's a new Middle East, but not the way Condoleezza Rice envisioned it, but really a new Middle East with a very robust axis of resistance. And Saudi Arabia has opened up diplomatic relations with Iran. Saudi Arabia is now out of the Abraham Accords, which was never a peace agreement to begin with. And they're also talking to Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, after a brutal a war of aggression, undeclared war of aggression against their neighbor Yemen that was really waged at the behest of the United States. So I think even the Saudis have woken up to this and they're thinking, is our future in Asia or is our future with the United States?
Well,
And
also something George and I have talked about. I think that, well, Netanyahu, if he survives this, and I think it's doubtful, there's too many knives out for him. But I could see in the medium term, go in, commit the ultimate atrocities that you could even imagine in Gaza, and then annex the West Bank. I think that's what he wants to do. Okay,
Yep.
because yeah, we got a bloody nose, we took some losses, but we got the West Bank, and the U.S. is not going to do anything about that. Okay.
Nope. No, and actually what you're saying, George, there's actually form to this. In the last 12 months, they have ethnically cleansed at least 12 villages in the West
Yes.
Bank.
Yes.
And they're on schedule to do another 24 in the next 2 years. So there is a policy, a clear policy of ethnic cleansing and building more illegal settlements in the West Bank, the Jordan Valley. So to completely, you're right, Peter, this would be a much easier, and it's so subdivided. It looks like if you look at the map of the Bantustans in South Africa during apartheid, this is exactly the system that Israel has constructed, but it's much better than anything the South African regime could ever do back then with modern technology and an overwhelming military force. So it'd be like the equivalent if you took an Indian reservation, let's say like the Cherokee reservation in Oklahoma or wherever in Arkansas, and then you take the map and you take a razor blade and you just slice and dice it, and then move the pieces apart and then put secure access roads between each. That's basically what's left of Palestine. Gaza is the biggest sort of continuous community within the occupied territories. But yeah, you're right about that. The game changer, Peter, in terms of public relations right now will be, for instance, Hollywood will be very involved in sculpting the story of this event over what's happened and what's about to happen. And if the U.S. They have deployed special forces, we have a base, by the way. The U.S. has a permanent base in Israel that opened in, I think, 2015. But so we already have a permanent facility there. But to send Navy SEALs in to rescue, quote, American hostages, who maybe were Israeli last week but are American this week, that will be a major media event if this actually takes place. The FBI are there as well, the hostage negotiators. So this is like a made-for-TV scenario. The danger here is then you're going to be compelled as an American to get behind Israel and the U.S. troops if they do engage. Otherwise, you'll be seen as very unpatriotic and pro-terrorist.
But the last time the United States tried to do that was, of course, Jimmy Carter in 1980, and of course that ended in catastrophe. It's very unlikely.
And ended his presidency.
Yeah, that's right. It's
Really?
very unlikely that the United States could pull something like this off. This is even more difficult if you try to rescue them in Gaza. I mean, that was just.
Are you guys saying that they might do this to Joe Biden again? Is that what you guys are inferring?
That's why we love to talk to you. Okay,
you're dropping a big hint there, guys. That would well and truly sink the Democrats, wouldn't it, if that thing went wrong, right?
Yes.
Are we getting too far ahead? We shouldn't even say this because we're going to be giving ideas to the American PR machine. I don't know, but I think that's a valid point. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That is a very good.
Well, we have the evacuation of Kabul, and then we could have this potential scenario. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, how do you see things now develop, Patrick, in the next few days? Do you see a full-scale invasion of Gaza? Do you think Netanyahu is going to go there?
Yeah, they've said it, but they've also delayed it. So it's already been pushed back.
Israel is very casualty averse. I mean, that's another aspect of it. So this is going to be a casualty-rich operation. So that's why
the last time they did this the type of incursion, I believe Israel lost 60 soldiers, and there were 300 or 600 casualties, casualties meaning injuries. So total casualties, I don't know the number, but over 300, let's say, and the 60 something dead soldiers on officially anyway. So what would it be in this case? Well, if you look at what's happened over the last 4 days, I would think the numbers will be higher. So what is the appetite for the Israeli public in terms of incurring losses on that side, or are they willing to incur losses on that side if they can exact a large number of dead Palestinians? Does that sound really evil and craven? Yes, it does. But this is warfare right now, and if you looked at what happened, if you saw a repeat of scenes of complete military failure, i.e., if for instance, TOW missiles or NLAWs, shoulder mounted, anti-tank. If Hamas has any of this, that's going to be a big problem. But they have basically flattened the city, so it's probably going to be relatively easier to do an invasion. The question is, what do they hope to do? Are they going to take? They will take a lot of prisoners. The Israelis, if they do, they will be putting pressure on women, children, families to give up the locations of their spouse, their sons, or Hamas, or anything like this. So if they've lifted all regulations or restrictions previously, and there'll be no military tribunals for violence against Palestinians on the Israeli side, then anything can go. And probably the worst excesses of the U.S. Invasion of Iraq, all the worst stories you've seen, think of that, multiply that times 10. It could be a massacre. Sabra and Shatila in Beirut, you can just imagine what the scenes might be, because if the Israelis believe that Hamas was killing babies, if they've been internally propagandized, and the internal propaganda in Israel is massive, it's massive. And if they believe that, then pretty much anything might be fair game in their mind, and their commanders would basically say, unleash hell. Unleash hell. And what could happen as a result of that? Like, what, I think
Well, we also have to consider, I can just add a layer to what you said, but it's more of a question. What do you do with the women and children? Are you going to feed them eventually? Are you going to give them water eventually? Are you going to give them electric? I don't think so, because of the atmosphere. Okay. What you committed a massacre against dancers in the desert. Why should you have any food or water? Okay.
Yeah. Why should you be allowed to live?
Yeah. That's the quandary for me. Is Israel can flatten this place, step it on like a beetle. Nobody doubts that. Okay. But what are you going to do? You going to occupy it? Is it going to be occupied, military occupation?
No, it'll be hit and run. And the head of the defense forces called the residents, or called the people in Gaza, human animals, I quote. So that should be an indication of what might be to come. If you've dehumanized your opposition to that degree, then really anything's possible. That why that's not being condemned, those words, by the international community is beyond me, because what could happen as a result of this. And so what happens if those massacres, if that scorched earth policy happens, what then can the international community say? What can Americans and Europeans say? Because they didn't speak up when all the telltale signs were there about what was coming. That's what my fear is. And I'm sure the people in Gaza are terrified.
But if you remember Sabra and Shatila, Israel managed to get away with that. I mean, of course, they didn't actually perpetrate the massacre, but they encouraged it. They knew exactly what was going to happen. I mean, they sent in those militia into the Palestinian camp. They knew exactly what those militia would do there. What about the hostages, the 100 to 150 hostages currently in Gaza? How do you think the Israelis are they going to just say, forget that, we're just going to flatten it, or are they going to try and somehow get them out?
They'll try to get some of them out, but there's also a doctrine that that they can also justify the death of the hostages if in the kind of fog of war. I don't know the actual policy or doctrine, but there is something in there regarding that. But they probably have human intelligence sources within Hamas, moles, etc., that will give up the location of some of the hostages. So they may recover some, Some will die, possibly in the crossfire. Some may have died already in the airstrikes, but that would be the real negotiating card for Hamas, because if the fighting goes on for a few weeks and the hostages aren't recovered, then the people in Israel are going to be like, well, okay, yeah, we've killed 20,000 Palestinians, you flattened Gaza, but where are our hostages? And so they're going to have to then give up some Palestinian hostages. Now, back in 2011, for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, they gave up 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. So Hamas will be playing that long game as well. So they say anyway, Hamas has released a statement, they have enough provisions, they have enough fuel, enough bullets, enough bombs, drones, missiles for a 1-year siege, they said. So up to 6 months, 6 months to a year or something like that.
I want to ask you a question that may be impossible for anyone not in the know to answer. How coordinated do you think this was with the players of Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, and of course Iran? Kind of a nod and a wink, or more specific than that? What's your gut feeling tell you?
My gut feeling is because of the audacity of this raid by Hamas. I mean, this is like unprecedented. This is beyond a third intifada. It's beyond what anybody expected. So because of the audacity and the level of penetration into the Israeli side on this, I would have to venture to guess that they would have a second wave strategy in phase 2 and maybe phase 3 and phase 4, because they do have a lot to lose. So if they don't have a significant change or a win from this, that's a hell of a thing to risk a large percentage of your population in Gaza in retaliatory strikes from Israel as a result of this raid by Hamas.
And what do you think that phase 2 and phase 3 entail? What's
it would be to distract and to draw out Israeli forces in multiple directions. In the Golan Heights, Sheba Farms, southern Lebanon, and maybe even other parts as well, and also inside of Israel as well, and the West Bank. So, that could be a possible strategy. What the end game is there, it could, will they know that they're going to draw the West into World War III? I would think that would have crossed their mind by now. So I don't know.
I take your earlier point about Hezbollah. Hezbollah will not enter this unless they feel confident that they can get a win out of it. They're conflict adverse too. They're very, very, very smart people. Okay, I mean, if my gut tells me, if we see a concerted, ongoing effort by Hezbollah, is that they've done the math.
Yeah, because Peter and George, one thing we did learn from Ukraine already, fast lessons have been learned in Ukraine. One thing we've learned is there's different timelines for different parties.
Yep.
And Russia has the luxury of playing a very long timeline on Ukraine, but NATO does not. And Ukraine itself, or the former form of what is now Ukraine, they don't have the luxury of time. They have political timelines they need to meet certain objectives and watermarks. If they don't meet them, the support dries up, the money dries up, the people in power get thrown out of office. That's not the case on the Russian Federation side. Likewise, on the axis of resistance side, even Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, they've been playing the long game. They're prepared to play the long game as long as it takes. But they have gradually, incrementally built up their capabilities and forces. So I don't think they'd want to waste an opportunity unless they had a good idea that they were going to get a successful outcome. They might do a test skirmish to see how Israel might react.
Well, it's already happening. They're eyeballing each other back and forth.
Yeah. So these are all important things. I mean, from the Western point of view, though, as a member of the public, as a journalist, or as somebody who is on social media, the most important thing here is to recognize this repeating pattern, like from Ukraine now again, which is the reframing of this conflict so that history, and for instance, in Ukraine, history began on February 24th, 2022. And anything before that must not be spoken of, must not be looked at. And so no more context historically. It was Putin's war of choice, Putin's war of aggression. Forget about the cause and effect before that. And stay in our little sort of tiny little framework of the narrative here. The same is happening here. They're saying this is Hamas's war of aggression. This was an unprovoked attack on Israel. It was an invasion of Israel. And that's quite an amazing thing, because legally, Hamas or Palestinians can't invade Israel because Israel hasn't declared its borders, and they've been deemed an illegal occupier by international UN resolutions. So they can't invade Israel. So, but what they've done is reframed it so that you don't look at the Nakba forward to 80 years of human rights abuses, of ethnic cleansing, systematic ethnic cleansing, and what some might call slow genocide. So
Well,
that
also
all
they don't want to say that presumably some of the Hamas fighters, they got through the border fortifications. Presumably, they're descendants of the people of the land that they were going after, the villages. But presumably, their parents, grandparents came from there, because we know a lot of them do. At least their descendants. An inconvenient fact. I'm just pointing that out.
So,
And some of their- yeah, go ahead,
Patrick, I
George.
mean, in terms of the planning of this, I mean, do you get a sense that Iran may have been involved, or at least Iran knew something was up? Do you think Hezbollah had or do you think this caught them by surprise and now they're just reacting to events? I mean, what's your sense?
I don't think Iran could directly help them other than financial support, perhaps some, elements of certain weapons or pieces of weapons that you could smuggle in. Most of the stuff is built there at a DIY style within Gaza. And they do that. They train, maybe some training, maybe some advice in certain things, but nobody knows that field better than the Palestinians. And I think there's a denial in the West. They don't, and the Israelis especially, they don't want to acknowledge or admit that the capabilities of the Palestinian resistance, especially in Gaza, hasn't improved massively. In the same way that the West wanted to totally deny that the Houthis in Yemen could bring Saudi Arabia to their knees with a $2,000 drone that they put together themselves and homemade missiles. Maybe they got the guidance systems from Iran. Maybe they got some of the pieces and maybe some of the schematics from Iran, but they did it themselves. You can absolutely be sure of it.
We see this, the people of Gaza have no agency. The Houthis, of course, they have no agency. The people of the Donbass, they have no agency. It's a pattern. We see this over and over again. Okay. No, it was only the Russians. No, the people of the Donbass had something to fight for, their lives.
Yeah, no, it was the little green men, Peter. It was the little green men in Donbass. DPR, LPR, they couldn't possibly put an effective militia together. It was the Russians. It was the Russians, and that not understanding that important component in history is not by accident. That is intentional. The reason that's intentional, because if you believe that's the narrative, then you basically rob take the DPR and the LPR as an example. You rob them of their rights under the UN Charter, Article 1, that they have the right to self-determination. But to do that, you have to raise your own militia. You have to defend borders. You have to provide governance, local governance. You have to tick all these boxes in order to qualify for autonomy and eventually statehood. So the way that's framed by the West is not by accident. That's intentional. And the same is true here in Palestine. The reframing is intentional. It is, like you said, Peter, to rob them of their agency, but to rob them of their rights under international law, but also their God-given rights, their immutable natural law rights that we enjoy in the West. If someone wanted to set up an ethno-state in the United States and then ethnically cleanse the natives in 2023, how many Americans would endorse that. Like, would that even be possible? It would be impossible. And yet we are cheering on this very thing halfway across the world. And, you know, from an American point of view, I really can't understand how people who bang on about the Constitution and sovereignty and liberty. Benjamin Franklin, was it Ben Franklin that said, Peter, you're the historian, give me liberty or give me death? No, who
No,
was that?
Patrick Henry.
Patrick Henry.
Patrick
That's
Henry.
See, you guys, you're way ahead of me. So give me give me liberty or
No,
give me
because
death.
that's what they taught me when I was in elementary school. Okay, I got
Yeah.
a basic education at that age. Okay, I'm dating myself, of course.
So, and you took civics as well
But I
when
mean,
you were a
but
freshman in high
you know,
school.
kind of going full circle here, and you know, where we get really wonky and nerdy about these things, but really, it's all about beheaded babies. Okay, that's what this is about. Okay. And that's what they want, because they don't want to go into the minutia. They never want to contextualize anything. It's so painful, and of course we all know, given our upbringing and our current age, I mean, we've been surrounded by this propaganda our entire lives.
Right. But just going back to your point about Iran, now, you know, we're basically agreeing that this could escalate into a major conflict. So therefore, what's Iran going to do? I mean, is Iran going to exert influence on Hamas? Is it going to try and exert influence on Hezbollah? What is going to be the strategy of Tehran? What's your feeling?
Well, listen, that's a very different ballgame today, because something happened after the United States, with Israeli intelligence, decided to whack General Qasem Soleimani and also Abu Mahdi Mohandes, the commander of the PMU units. Something happened after that, and that was an Iranian missile strike on 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. They flattened 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. And what did the United States do in retaliation? I can't remember, because they did nothing.
Yep.
Iran shot down a Reaper drone or a Reaper drone, and it breached Iranian airspace before that. I think it was in the summer before that. I can't remember. Yeah. And what did the U.S. do in retaliation to Iran after that? They did nothing. So why did the U.S. do nothing? Because the U.S. could do nothing. Because this would expose all of the U.S. locations and facilities, including the naval fleet in Bahrain. And CENTCOM has cut and run from Qatar. They're moved to, where are they now? North Carolina? They're gone. They're pretty much packed up from Qatar. The reason they packed up from Qatar is exactly what you saw with the missile strikes on U.S. facilities. So every U.S. base or location in the Middle East becomes it will be flattened within hours. Okay, they wouldn't have time to evacuate. That's the reality. And so Iran has that capability. They've demonstrated that in Syria by hitting ISIS targets with 1 missile strike. I think they did a demonstration. When was that? 2017 or something, 15? I can't remember. Then the strike on the U.S. bases. So Iran doesn't have to deploy troops. They don't have to deploy their air force. They have the type of capabilities that the Russian Federation have. And this is the big threat, and they don't want to destroy. It's ludicrous to think that Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. They don't, because Israel is full of Palestinians. The last thing the Iranians want to do is to kill large numbers of Palestinians. That's not even what they said. Ahmadinejad said in his notorious Columbia University speech. Has been totally mistranslated, as you know. But that's still the talking point in the West. So Iran. That's what Iran can do. So they don't have to. It's Syria is maybe more directly engaged with Israel. Hezbollah definitely. Egypt, it's unknown what Egypt is going to do. Probably nothing. They're kind of
maybe wait to see where things go.
Yeah, and maybe monitor the border and send forces to the border there in the Sinai. I mean. So and what will Saudi Arabia do? That's an interesting question. Would they sit this one out on the sideline, or would they flex their muscles, because they basically voiced their tacit support?
But it depends. If there is indeed an all-out onslaught on Israel, I think a number of these countries are going to get involved. I think there'll be enormous pressure to get involved. I mean, even on Egypt, hey, if it's everybody all out on Israel, we got to get involved because that'll
And-
get the
and-
pressure
and-
from the street.
George, what Egypt could say, and I think it would actually be plausible, is a right to protect of Gaza. I mean, somebody's got to have to take care of these people, okay?
Yeah.
Which the Saudis would probably underwrite in other countries to, to show their goodwill, their positive force in the world. But in the Egyptian part there, it seems to me that they could become a caretaker, at least a temporary one, because it's going to need a lot of help. No, if this conflict ended at this moment, there's at least a decade of rebuilding, at least.
There were moves afoot, if my history serves me correctly, under Gamal Abdel Nasser for Egypt to play such a role in Gaza. But the British reaction to that was to build up the Muslim Brotherhood factions as well, and as a kind of tool of subterfuge, but also to build the kind of the radical wings and then steer and control those in history. So I think Israel would be very averse to Egypt playing any caretaker role. But in the aftermath of a major war, who knows what would be permissible.
Egypt doesn't really have any money. I mean, what Israel always does.
I just said Saudi Arabia would underwrite
No,
it.
I think it won't even be Saudi Arabia. It'll be the European Union. I mean, that's what always happens. You dump it in the lap of the European Union. You cough up the money, and the European Union always does it. They cough up the money.
You living in the European, you're just so damn generous.
Exactly. This is what Israel always does. We're not going to pay for any of this reconstruction. You do it. And the EU comes along and writes a check.
Well, where are they going to get the cash? Because then they're going to have to take that money from Zelensky's lunch money budget. Yeah. He's banging his pots and pans together this week. Did you see his tweet? Blaming Russia for
unlike most people, I've been to Ukraine many, many times, and I think it's very fair to say that Ukraine is one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world. Okay, so it's really extraordinary to see all the flags.
Well, yeah, Patrick, I mean, this has really been a fascinating conversation. We could go on for hours, but I know you have a very heavy schedule. You're on a 20-hour shifts every day. But thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you for all your fascinating insights. It's been a great conversation. And we look forward to having you back again very soon. Thank you, Peter. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.